Brett McMurphy earlier today. This is only about scheduling. This is a tweet from earlier today. Brett's going to join us today at 4, that the Big Ten is strongly considering removing the requirement of league teams to play a Power 5 non-conference team annually. Starting in 2024, that, of course, is when USC and UCLA join the Big Ten, the same year that the college football playoff expands to 12 teams. So because of the addition of UCLA and USC is what this story about is we already have enough tough games because we're in our conference. We don't need to sit there and have any mandate of who you play in non-conference. Some schools, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, I'm not saying, maybe it's even Minnesota and Nebraska will still have non-conference games against Power 5, and there's that term Power 5. Your thoughts about this story? Craig, start with you.
Yeah, it just seems like it could be for the folks that think that the two top leagues are going to break off. It seems like another step towards that, doesn't it? Or, I mean, at least if you were, like, formulating, like, how that could come to be, well, have one of them stop playing teams from the Pac-12, the Big 12, the SEC, whatever, until the playoff, and limit those types of games on the schedule. I think that's a bummer for fans of huge non-con games if, in fact, it does result in everybody just saying, well, let's get a couple gimmies in here and then go play our Big Ten schedule. But I enjoy the big non-con games, but I also understand that bringing two teams into the league and you're figuring out what you're going to do about scheduling and you have a greater emphasis on, the league opponents, that you got to have some leeway somewhere. But, at the same time, I don't really think this is an era where you have to really worry too much about easing your schedules up all that much because of the expanded playoff. Right? So whereas one loss might have killed you, then that loss doesn't really kill you now. So I don't know how much this actually helps. Maybe it gets some of the more mid or like B-tier teams over the hump in an expanded playoff era versus an Ohio State who, if they lost to Alabama in week 2 but runs the table, they're going to be totally fine. But it's interesting that they are looking at that, and it makes me wonder how the schedules continue to kind of evolve over these next few years. Like, do we hear something similar from the SEC in the future? And then what does that mean if they both say, like, well, we're not going to play Power 5 teams anymore? Well, then it leaves you in a little bit of a pickle, doesn't it, if you're some of these other schools out there that want to have a Power 5 opponent to bring folks to your stadium in week number 2, or to have the big bump on your schedule or whatever. So that's very interesting, and I know there's so much talk that's going on, whether it's the SEC or it's the Big Ten or whatever, about the future and about scheduling, and there's so much to figure out there. So that is an interesting little wrinkle for the Big Ten.
Ohio State has Notre Dame this year. That's not what they're talking about. In 2024 for them, this is a little bit, I'll use the word, a little bit softer than they normally would have. Southern Miss, with all due respect to these programs, West Virginia, Western Michigan, and there's Marshall, who beat Notre Dame last year. But then they have Texas for a couple of years in a row, Alabama for a couple of years in a row, and that's normally what they do.
Well, the other thing that's going to happen, like, you can say all you want, you're going to have softer non-conference schedules and all that, and maybe you try because, like Craig said, it's not going to hurt you as much anymore, but eventually that stuff's all going to come out in the wash. And also, TV is driving this whole thing. Mm-hmm. Conference realignment is about making better games over everything else, because better games mean better ratings, mean all of that. So USC and UCLA are going to the Big Ten because the TV muckety-mucks have decided that is what is a better. USC versus Michigan is better than USC versus Oregon State.
Yeah, and but is USC against Rutgers any better?
No, but if they can somehow, they're
not going to play. No. USC is they're not going to play Ohio State.
They're not getting
Michigan,
the Nebraska
Penn
schedule.
State.
Yeah, they're not getting the Nebraska
Welcome
schedule.
Welcome to the Big Ten, and now you're playing everybody that's ever won a national title.
No, but that's what they're trying to do while mitigating the lesser ones.
And by the way, I would love that. I would love that. Michigan, future schedules. Texas in 24, Oklahoma back-to-back, Texas and Washington. And that's normally what they do. I won't bring up any other Big Ten teams.
No, I think it's a little too early to have too strong of an opinion because it's not anything that's solidified. It's basically an option you're going to have. So if you're Ohio State and you want to play Michigan, you want to play Texas and you want to go then play Oklahoma and you want to go play Miami or whatever, you have every right to do that.
Yep.
They're not preventing you from doing that. But what they are saying is they're open to the idea of that not being a requirement.
Right.
And so you don't have to if you don't want to. So guess what? If it would have been Baylor circa 2010 to 2015, they would have seen that requirement and been like, all right, we're just going to play 3 cupcakes and we're going to roll into the Big 12.
Play
and
Buffalo.
We're going to go, we're going to play Buffalo. We'll play
Texas
ACU
State.
and Texas State, and we'll be good to go for Big 12 play. And then there are others that, whether it's a rivalry, whether it's, just the history of that, or it's just wanting to pop a big attendance figure at the week 2, week 3 game, they might still, or just wanting, it's the coach's mentality that no, we need a good week 2 game. We want a good week 3 game. We want to have this team go up against somebody who's pretty good. It's going to be their choice. So it's not like the Big Ten's coming in and saying we are forbidding you from playing this or we're not allowing this to happen. No, it's whoever wants to do it the way they want to do it. That's fine. But for those teams that do want to take a bit of an easier path and say, well, that's one less difficult game on our schedule,
they
who
can
might
do that. The
So,
ones that may not be so sure they're going to get to a bowl game, which is what
Right.
Baylor did when they didn't go to a bowl game for 16 years. USC 2024, LSU and Notre Dame on their schedule. 2025, Ole Miss and Notre Dame. They're going to always have a couple of those games, along with, of course, what they're going to play in the Big Ten.
And I think the difference is that when you get to a certain point, what Baylor didn't do, and it's hard to schedule. It's not like if they did want to try and call and play someone that the other person still has to pick up the phone. But what they did not do is make a concerted effort to add some of those right away when they had the opportunity to. So that's where it looked bad, was where, okay, now your schedule has worked out for you. Let's see a better non-conference game. And then the response from, that was the previous athletic department administration, was always like, I don't think we're going to do that. Or like, maybe, we'll see. We'll work on it.
Well,
and so there's a little difference there. Yeah,
that's changed with BYU before they joined the conference. Now Utah, there's Oregon, there's Auburn. I am so thrilled with it. I love it. Well, that they're doing that now.
And it's good for the FCS, schools that if, the Big Ten doesn't have this rule against scheduling them as they did at one point in time, then that's terrific news that you can continue to play those types of teams, because I would think with the schedules, in theory ramping up, and having maybe another game that's more difficult or another couple of games that are more difficult, you're gonna love that FCS game, and the FCS teams are gonna love that payoff and the experience and all those types of things. So I think that's a good thing that will be in place for Big Ten teams, is to have the FCS opportunity, because I think it's equally important for the other side of it. Not so much it's important for Michigan to have that opponent. It's important for the FCS school that's getting to go to Ann Arbor to play a game and make some money. That's important too.
I would amend one thing about playing the FCS schools. I would like to see the FCS schools be the spring game exhibitions.
Are they going to make it? But they have,
and that can be your guarantee game.
Because they're not going to guarantee a spring game, are they?
Well, if you want
$1 million,
well, maybe I don't know. I don't like the guarantee games. I hate them. I know that they're important for that. I just think
I'm just saying you're not going to get the same money for a spring. I have always been not a spring game. I've always been, why don't they allow in college football? I remember I've asked every Baylor coach that's been here, why not have, like on the 3rd week of August or 2nd week in August, a scrimmage? What's wrong with that? Injury. Well, you can get injured anytime. You can get injured practicing against each other. So I've always wondered that. But I get what you're saying. But the FC, it's not because my alma mater, they don't survive without those non-conference games.
No, I was trying to give you a compromise, because you're going to sell tickets to a game that
spring game.
Well, because there's only 2 options when you can do it. I mean, you're going to do it in the spring, or you're going to do it in right before the season. When else are you going to do it? You're going to do it in the fall? Well, oh wait, you got a schedule. You're going to do it after the season? Well, you got to have a little bit of buffer time. So I understand where he's coming from, but at the same time, for those of us saying, well, that's great for the FCS schools, I know there's a lot of people not looking at it that way, and they hate that opponent. They don't want to play the FCS school in week 2. They want to play another big-time game and want to see another big-time game. So that's this interesting tug-of-war that's going to go on with this expanded playoff of, what is the right way to schedule? What is the best thing for everybody involved? And I know a lot of decisions will be just the best for who that person or the institution is involved, but there's definitely a split on whether there should be those types of games moving forward. And I'm sure the Big Ten saying that they're going to allow it, not that they love it, not that they're encouraging it, but that they will allow it to some extent. That's going to be a split, I think, opinion that you get back on that as well. So really, I guess it just depends on who you ask. Some people will love it, and some people will say, no, that should be another game against a big-time opponent instead. So
I'll give you an example. Colby Carthel hates him. He's the head coach at SFA. It's not that he doesn't understand money, budget, but at the same time, he said his team, by the time they get to mid-September, late September to start playing conference games, they are just – and that's a pretty good school, pretty decent amount of roster and all that. He said they are beat the hell up.
And they've got FBS players that have transferred in a great deal of time. My point is the spring game conversation has been brought up by coaches. Gus Malzahn talked about it this year. Other ones have said, like, I would rather, it would be better if we could play, if we're going to do something, let's play a spring exhibition game. They'd be for it. So if coaches are for it, look, maybe you're not going to do $1 million. Of course, that could build up. You might be able to do $1 million because it might still be in your budget and you're going to put more into the spring game. Plus, television would probably want it more.
You think we'd be curious how much the attendance would be for? I know that Nebraska fills the stands, and some, if UT has a coaching change or they need to show some support, they'll even get a lot of people there. Oklahoma, but I wonder what the attendance would be if the attendances across the board would be much higher for a spring game than they are right now, when some schools just support it and some could say, okay, get it over with.
I can tell you, absolutely they would be.
Yeah, at first, yes. And two,
you think that Oklahoma's spring game against SFA?
Yeah, two things. One, immediately yes, because if Baylor had played SFA in this spring, whatever the heck they did over here, would have been a lot more interesting to people than being able to sit in the stands and try to follow along with a scoring sheet of offense versus defense and
that's a little
whatever coach games they're playing there. Way more interesting than that. It's also, and let's not forget about this part, television. So for the streaming and for all the spring games that you're watching, and you've got people, tons of them are on ESPN Plus. It's a lot better than, two guys just basically sitting talking over a practice, because that's all it really is. So if you have a spring game where the FCS teams are playing and there's at least a little bit of competition to it, way more interesting television all the way around, and way more interesting television means more money.
I think a scrimmage in August would be more beneficial. But that's just my opinion. I'm not going to try to change your mind or your mind. I'm just giving you my opinion. From talking to coaches in the past, they would rather have it in August, but that could be changing now.
I understand, but I think we're getting in the mud on the point that you're making. It's not about whether it's in the spring or it's in the summer. It's just, I think in general, like Paul thinks it'd be better in the spring, you think it'd be better in the summer. That's fine. It doesn't really matter. The point being of just the attraction itself would be a draw.
I agree.
The attraction itself would be a bigger draw than green or gold at McLean with the funky rule system or whatever that you're talking about. If you say, it's Baylor versus, Lamar, that's not going to get people like super excited, but it's something that's better than the green and gold game. Or if it's Baylor UTSA, you're going to be like, hell yeah, they'd probably sell that bad boy out for a spring game with Baylor and UTSA, even if it's a glorified scrimmage or if it's in the summertime. So I think that's, something that was brought up. I mean, that's been brought up for years, the idea of doing something along those lines.
I have asked since Art Briles, my first year here, ask him that question. Yeah, I agree. It has been a topic.
Yeah, and it was this past, month or two as well, and we saw some articles written about that, so yeah.